Welcome to Athletics Archive's Visual History Series featuring Roger Bannister and the Mile Greats on track to the first sub-4-minute mile. In the 1930s, in the 1940s, and in the early 1950s. Until 1954, when the first sub-4-minute mile was achieved by Roger Bannister of England, thus breaking what had become one of the ultimate barriers in sport and human performance. Roger Bannister and the Mile Greats is an Athletics Archive special edition visual history series for athletics enthusiasts. Let us go back in time to May the 6th, 1954, Iffley Road, Oxford, England, for the annual match between Oxford University and the 3As. The time is 10 to 6, 10 minutes before the start of the mile. Weather conditions are bad for really fast miling, with a strong wind gusting across the track. The 6 competitors prepare for the race. The gusting wind drops to a mere breeze. The air of tension increases further. The record attempt is on. Chataway is first out onto the track. The line-up from the inside is Dole, Brasher, Gordon, Bannister, Chataway and Hewlett. Brasher breaks for a false start. The tension mounts even further. However, we get ahead of our real story. The journey that had led to Iffley Road, Oxford, May the 6th, 1954, had started back in the 19th century when Walter George and the early greats of the mile had begun the remorseless battle against the stopwatch. A battle which was accelerated by multiple world record holder and Olympic champion Paavo Nurmi, together with the mile greats of the first half of the 20th century, until Gunder Haig and Arne Anderson began to close rapidly on the 4-minute mile barrier, as had been forecast by Paavo Nurmi himself. Haig and Anderson improved the world mile record 6 times, until Gunder Haig approached within 5 strides of the 4-minute mile barrier in 1945. The journeys of Bannister, Brasher and Chataway had also started years earlier in 1946, when the real foundations for the ultimate success at Iffley Road were laid. For the young Roger Bannister, the journey as a miler had started at Oxford University 8 years earlier, and had followed a path of careful and gradual improvement, climaxing at Iffley Road, and then with fulfillment as a champion. For the young Chris Brasher, the Cambridge cross-country man's 7-year journey to Oxford had been wonderfully diverse, with barriers to clear and mountains to climb. And the journey would climax with a magnificent Olympic victory 2 years beyond Iffley Road. For the young Chris Chataway, the journey had been from a schoolboy miler in 1948 to Iffley Road, Oxford 6 years later, and then beyond to thrilling world records at longer distances, and also to becoming the 4th man to run the sub-4-minute mile. Now, from Oxford 1954, let us turn back the years of Roger Bannister's journey on track to the first sub-4-minute mile. And now in 1948, the earliest known film of Roger Bannister in competition, as an 18-year-old at the varsity match. and again in 1948 on May the 6th, 6 years earlier to the very day, on the old 3-lap-to-the-mile track at Iffley Road, in the same Oxford University versus the 3A's match. Roger Bannister provides a glimpse of things to come. This rare film is made available by the Charnock Athletics Film Resource. Original cinematography is by Guy Butler and Associates, with a specific tribute to Guy Butler in our conclusion. Much of the film is new and has never been seen in public before, and the film provides a major resource for athletics enthusiasts and historians worldwide. Accordingly, Charnock Athletics Film have specially made available this entire film resource for the production of the Bannister and the Margrave series of visual histories, on the clear basis that the series is a special edition tailored to the specific interests of athletics enthusiasts and historians worldwide. Accordingly, Athletics Archive Productions have developed a visual history presentation format specific to our great sport of track and field athletics, and specific to the interests of athletics enthusiasts and historians worldwide. The Athletics Archive Visual History Series, Roger Bannister and the Mile Greats, details the progress of Bannister and of world miling between 1946 to 1954. Linked to the progress from 1880 to 1945 of the early greats of the mile on track to the first sub-4-minute mile. This special edition series of Athletics Archive Visual Histories is now introduced by Norris McWhirter.
The period 1946 to 1954 is one of immense importance in the history of amateur athletics. It was one before the onset of performance-enhancing drugs. In it, we have the development towards the 4-minute mile and the history of Roger Bannister in the years leading up to that great occasion in 1954. Oral and visual history of the 1940s and the 1950s has hitherto been missing, but now with the discovery of a lot of neglected film stock, it has been possible to reconstruct events step by step through the period 1946 up to the eventual actual achievement by Roger Bannister of the 4-minute mile in 1954.
The visual history of the first steps in Roger Bannister's career from 1946 to the 1948 3A's Championships will be released in 2004, the 50th anniversary of the first sub-4-minute mile at Oxford. The next 3 visual histories in the Bannister and the Margrave series continue year by year to provide a visual and oral record of the progress towards and the achievement of the first sub-4-minute mile at Iffley Road, Oxford. Beyond Iffley Road, the 5th visual history features John Landy's world record and the Empire Games mile, Roger Bannister's final triumph, Chris Chataway's world records, Chris Brasher's heroic Olympic victory, and the meteoric arrival of Ronnie Delaney. Then the Margrave series continues on, beyond Bannister and Landy's pioneering achievements.
Other visual histories of world athletics in the 40s and 50s will be released as we near the 50th anniversary of the formation of the NUTS in 2008 and the centenary of the formation of the world governing body in the year 2012. The oral history exists, is recorded, the film exists, so it is essential now to seize the opportunity urgently to make these visual histories before we have a situation reminiscent of old soldiers, because great athletes not only fade, they die away.
Norris McWhirter is most widely known as the founding editor and compiler of the Guinness Book of Records. Amongst his many and varied contributions to British life and international affairs is his major contribution to track and field athletics. As a sprinter, he was shortlisted as an Olympic 200-metre possible in 1947 and represented Scotland in international matches. As a journalist, he was a frequent contributor to British publications. And in 1952, with his twin brother Ross, they founded Athletics World, a monthly magazine for aficionados. The pages of Athletics World were to chronicle the quest for the first sub-4-minute mile. Norris McWhirter was also a regular contributor to the respected World Sports magazine. As a statistician, Norris McWhirter was one of the founder members of the ATFS, the Worldwide Association of Track and Field Statisticians. He was an early compiler of in-depth British statistics. And along with Harold Abrahams, he was the inspiration for the foundation in Britain in 1958 of the respected NUTS statistical body. As historians, Ross and Norris McWhirter co-authored Get to Your Marks, a short history of world athletics from 1850 to 1950. Get to Your Marks was acclaimed for its unique blend of concise and informative text, together with an accurate and well-presented statistical overview. On May the 6th, 1954, at Iffley Road, Oxford, Norris McWhirter was the meeting organizer and announcer. Here is the stopwatch which Norris McWhirter used to call the running time during the mile.
2 minutes 58, 59, 3 minutes, 1, 2, 3.
His suspense-laden announcement of the result will live on with the folklore of the first sub-4-minute mile.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the result of event number 9, the 1 mile. First, number 41, R.G. Bannister, Amateur Athletic Association, formerly of Exeter and Merton Colleges, with a time which is a new meeting and track record, and which, subject to ratification, will be a new English native, British national, British all-comers, British Commonwealth, European and world record, the time 3 minutes 59.4 seconds.
When did Norris McWhirter concoct this classic 45-second announcement?
In the bath the night before.
Right, okay. Yeah.
I lived in Winchmore Hill in North London, and I was convinced he was going to do it.
Yes.
Because having been present at all his training sessions and all the rest, and seeing him doing 3 quarters and things, and knowing the urgency of it, the only thing could stop him would be the wind.
Right.
It damn near did.
Right.
Norris McWhirter is uniquely qualified to guide us step by step through the journey which the world's mile greats took on track to the first sub-4-minute mile. We are profoundly grateful for his contributions and for his enthusiasm for this visual history series. 1946 to 1948 is the first visual history in the Bannister and the Mile Greats series, and features the young Roger Bannister, the 1946 European Championship 1500 metres, the former world mile record holder Sidney Wooderson, Leonard Strand's world record and career, Sidney Wooderson in cross-country action, the young Chris Brasher and Chris Chataway, the English champions Doug Wilson and Bill Nankivell, The 1948 3A's mile final with Nankivell, Bartel and Bannister. The leading British athletic stars of the 1940s are also shown in action, including Emmanuel MacDonald Bailey, Arthur Wint, Donald Finlay, Maureen Gardner and Dorothy Tyler. The varsity matches of 1947 and 48 are covered, together with the Oxford University versus 3A's matches, and the Kinnaird Trophy meeting, including the Polytechnic 3A's marathon, which in 1948 featured Jack Holden and Tom Richards, and the 1948 3A's championships, which served as the British Olympic trials. And the pre-Olympic build-up shows Olympic champions-to-be and all-time greats preparing for the Wembley Games, including Mel Patton. The 39-year-old Donald Finlay goes through his exercise routine. John Winter of Australia, Giuseppe Tossi, and Adolfo Consolini. The pre-Olympic 1500-meter build-up features Strand and Eriksson and the main challengers to the Swedish dominance. The Reverend Gil Dodds of America, who set an indoor world record for the mile in 1948. And the other main Olympic contenders, Willy Slickhouse of Holland and Marcel Hansen of France, who would challenge the Swedish 1500-meter greats. And climaxing with the 1948 Olympic 1500-meter final with a special athletics archive reconstruction, which presents the visual evidence which debunks some of the myths regarding the controversial finish. Henry Eriksson's career from 1937 to 1948. Roger Bannister's progress up to the end of the 1948 season, with the earliest known films of Roger Bannister's races. The progress of the early greats, from Walter George to Tommy Conniff to Fred Bacon, and to Joe Binks, and on to Joe Binks as a journalist in 1948.
It's realistic to understand that in the years 1946 to 1948, just in the wake of World War II, things were very, very different than they are today. There was the rationing. It was really tight. There was austerity. And a lot of people had no fridges and things. Few people had cars. Life was very different indeed, and so was track and field athletics. It was amateur. And when you think that the two best contenders to do a 4-minute mile in those days were regarded as Leonard Strand of Sweden, who worked full-time. He was also a concert pianist, and he fitted in athletics as and when he could. Also in America, there was the Reverend Gil Dodds, this famous flying parson. He was a fully ordained minister, and he had a lot of other duties and calls than those of athletics.
In 1946, sport was a game, a recreation, because war had been so horrifyingly real and had lasted for so long. 1946 was also the year when the young Roger Bannister began his career as a miler. Now let us look together at Roger Bannister's first 1.5 years of university competition, which laid the foundation for his ultimate success. Meanwhile, Sidney Wooderson was participating in a full cross-country season for Blackheath Harriers, mixing recreational and championship races in preparation for the English National Championships in mid-March. Here we summarize Sidney Wooderson's carefully planned build-up to the National by reference to Michael Sheridan's publication, The Gentle Cyclone, which lists every race in Sidney Wooderson's running career. In the autumn of 1947, Sidney ran in 7 low-key cross-country races, including second team and schools events. In the new year, Sidney won the Kent County title from strong opposition, and 2 weeks later he helped the Kent team to win the prestigious Inter-Counties Championship and finished third in the individual. After 2 low-key races in February, Sidney won the Southern Counties title. And then, after one more low-key race at his old school the next weekend, Sidney was ready to face the daunting challenge of the English National Cross Country Championships. The championship brought together the top road runners, track athletes, and a cadre of specialist cross-country runners, including the main contenders, Vic Blofield of Belgrave Harriers, Albert Shorrocks of Hales Owen, Jack Charlesworth of Aylesford Paper Mills. Sidney Wooderson stood alone, a track runner, a former world 800-meter record holder, ready and able to challenge for the title. The course at Sheffield was to be a demanding test, even for the specialists, with 10 miles, 16 kilometers of undulating grassland, some steep hills, a stretch of ploughed field, and finally a steep uphill run to the finish. The field charged down the 600-yard starting straight. When the field spread out, Sidney Wooderson was just behind the leaders and tracking Vic Blofield. With 3 miles to go, Albert Shorrocks led the field, with Sidney Wooderson and Vic Blofield also in the leading bunch, and running comfortably within 5 yards of the leader. With just over half a mile to go to the finish, Shorrocks, Wooderson and Blofield led, with Wooderson now looking desperately tired. Blofield took the lead and built up a significant gap before the leaders went out of sight. The crowd at the top of the hill waited expectantly to acclaim Blofield as the winner. Then a great cheer went up. Sidney Wooderson was now in the lead. Sidney won his cherished national title, with Blofield and Shorrocks finishing within 7 seconds of the winner. Sidney Wooderson of Blackheath Harriers was English national cross-country champion after just under 57 minutes of remorseless running. Sidney's victory had owed much to willpower and determination.
And there we see this amazing athlete right at the top of his range. 10 miles, hills and hard going. What amazing stamina and what versatility. And now we're going to look at his complete range, right from 10 miles to 1/4 mile.
And now our visual appreciation illustrates Sidney Wooderson's full range of running events, showing Sidney in cross-country rhythm, running at 5,000 meter pace as 1946 European champion, running at mile pace, for which he was the world record holder from 1937 to 1942, and now his 800 meter stride, the distance for which he was world record holder in 1938, and now at near full speed, which raises the question of Sidney's 400 meter capability.
And there are those who seriously thought that if Wooderson had concentrated on the sprint distances, he would have given even the great A.G.K. Brown a fright.
This informed conjecture indicates massive potential, since Godfrey Brown himself had untapped potential, despite being the Olympic 400 meter silver medalist. This reference is included in Guy Butler's booklet on Sidney Wooderson and in related unpublished research. which will be presented in edition 3 of Bannister and the Mile Greats, which also covers the mile greats of the 1930s, including Sidney Wooderson's world records.
In 1948, when Wooderson was approaching his mid-30s, he was still right up there in world class over a whole range.
Over 5,000 metres, he was number 3 of all time, behind only fellow all-time greats Gunder Haig and Emil Zatopek. Over the mile, he was number 4, behind Gunder Haig, Arne Andersen and Rune Persson. And over 800 metres, he was still number 3 of all time, behind Rudolf Harbig and Olympic champion John Woodruff. The main and invaluable sources used to research Sidney Wooderson's career include Sidney Wooderson, The Forgotten Champion by David Thurlow, A Gentle Cyclone, The Running Career of Sidney Wooderson by Michael Sheridan, and Sidney Wooderson and Some of His Great Rivals by Guy Butler.
Sidney Wooderson really was one of the most astounding athletes. When you consider that he lost all those peak years during the war, when he would have been at his absolute best. And it's not an exaggeration to say that had he had the opportunities, a person with his natural speed and his demonstrable stamina could have been a very serious challenger for the first 4-minute mile. Another Briton.
Assessments of Sidney Wooderson's capability to have run sub 4 minutes for the mile in the 1940s will be presented in the 4th edition of Bannister and the Mile Greats, together with reconstructions of his great mile races in 1945.
And when you think also that in 1944 he was almost at death's door and he recovered for those astounding post-war performances, including a mile in 4:4 and the European 5,000 metre title and the English cross-country title. What a man.
A visual comparison of Sidney Wooderson's and Roger Bannister's career progress will be presented in the 2nd and subsequent editions of Bannister and the Mile Greats. One week after the National Cross Country, attention switched to the White City track for the 74th Varsity Athletics match.
The 1948 Oxford v Cambridge match was the first fixture in the Olympic season in the host country. It began, in fact, a string of Oxford wins against Cambridge, 10 of them, one after the other.
However, the individual star was the Cambridge president, Ivor Vind, who bettered the 72-year-old varsity match record, which had been the 1876 world record when winning the high jump. He also won the pole vault and the discus for good measure. Ivor Vind served on the International Olympic Committee for nearly 20 years. On the track, Oxford dominated the sprint events. Here in the 440 yards, the Oxford president, Peter Wallace of South Africa, sets the example with a decisive victory, which he followed up by placing 2nd in the furlong. Johnny Wilkinson here wins the 100 convincingly, and went on to score a sprint double. Norris McWhirter was 2nd in the 100, despite having broken his leg only 17 weeks earlier. And Raymond Barkway, nearest to the camera, scoring a decisive victory in the high hurdles. 6 years later at Iffley Road, Oxford, Raymond Barkway was to play another role, as the starter for the mile in the historic Oxford University versus 3A's match, when the announcer and meeting organizer was another 1948 varsity match competitor, Norris McWhirter. The mile was eagerly anticipated, with the press stating that Cambridge have a most promising performer in R.E. Williams, and the race in which he is opposed to Bannister and Green of Oxford will be one of the best of the afternoon. The Oxford team had the unusual distinction of including 3 previous varsity match winners: Bannister in 1947, Green in 1946, and Gray during a wartime match in 1943. In the race, Gray, the Oxford third string, set the early pace, with Bannister taking the lead at 600 yards and dominating the race from the front. Winning by nearly 20 yards and finishing full of his running. Roger Bannister had improved his personal best to 4-minute 23.4. Let us look again at the earliest known film of Roger Bannister, including this time the original slow-motion shots of the finish. Norris McWhirter gives his comments.
What is so impressive is the marvellous maturity. Here is an 18-year-old, and just watch the way he runs through the tape. Although 20 yards ahead, it looks almost as if he's taking off for a fifth lap.
Harold Abrahams's report in 1948 was also enthusiastic. I pick out R.G. Bannister's 4-minute 23.4 as superb. That boy will surprise me if he does not go near winning an Olympic title 4 years hence. Harold Abrahams also commented that the track was obviously very slow. The most competitive race of the day was the 3 miles, won by Oxford cross-country captain Pollard from Jones of Cambridge, with Chris Brasher making his track debut for Cambridge, finishing back in 4th place. The 19-year-old Brasher had a ding-dong battle for 3rd with Curry of Oxford, the Olympic steeplechaser to be. Chris Brasher's time was 15-minute 15, worth around 16 minutes for 5,000 metres. Oxford were the overwhelming winners of the match, by the highest margin since the point-scoring system was adopted.